5 days. That was all the time left for the man they called the Water Wizard after he crossed the Atlantic to return to his native Austria in September 1958. He was no longer the vigorous observer of nature who had once watched trout hover in torrential alpine streams with a grace that defied every law of conventional physics. He was a shadow, a hollowed-out vessel of a man, carrying the crushing weight of a secret he had been forced to sign away in the suffocating heat of a Texas laboratory. Only months earlier, in a room filled with men in sharp suits and opaque intentions, a pen had been pushed into his trembling hand. The choice presented to him was as brutal as it was simple. Sign over every right, every patent, and every shred of knowledge regarding his life's work to an American consortium, or remain a prisoner of the desert, never to see the jagged peaks of his homeland again. He signed. In that moment, he didn't just surrender ink to paper. He surrendered a key to a form of energy that could have rewritten the destiny of human civilization. Upon his return to Linz, he whispered to his son, Walter, a sentence that continues to haunt the fringes of suppressed history. They took everything from me. I do not even own myself. This was not the mere rambling of a defeated elder, but the final gasp of a genius who had spent decades decoding the hidden language of the living world, only to be devoured by the very industrial machine he sought to transform. The story we are unearthing today is not just a biography of a forgotten naturalist. It is an investigation into the exact moment humanity chose to ignore the pulse of the living earth in favor of the mechanics of death. What this man discovered in the deep, untouched forests of Central Europe was so threatening to the global energy status quo that his memory had to be systematically shredded, his work classified, and his name relegated to the realm of eccentric folklore. At the unseen key, we exist to pull these buried truths from the abyss. If you believe that true knowledge is a right and not a privilege granted by the powerful, you are in the right place. Your subscription and your support here are more than just numbers. They are an act of resistance against the engineered silence that was imposed on minds like Victor's. It is only through those who seek the depth beneath the surface that the keys to our future can be recovered. And what this forest master saw in the swirl of a freezing mountain stream was something that the official science of his day, and perhaps even our own, was simply not prepared to acknowledge as reality. But to understand how a man of peace ended up in a Texas interrogation room, we must first go back to the source, to the silence of the woods where the water first spoke to him. Born in 1885 into a long lineage of foresters that stretched back over 4 centuries, this observer of the wild was not shaped by the sterile walls of a university or the rigid formulas of an engineering degree. His university was the ancient primordial forest of the Böhmerwald. It is a detail often omitted by those who try to debunk his work, but it is perhaps his most important credential. He was an absolute layman. He possessed no academic titles, no formal training in hydraulics, and no allegiance to the scientific dogmas of the early 20th century. He viewed the world not as a collection of dead resources to be exploited, but as a singular, pulsing organism. While the mainstream science of his era was becoming increasingly analytical, breaking nature into smaller and smaller pieces until the life was gone, he was practicing the art of holistic observation. he began to notice something that the most decorated hydraulic engineers of the time had missed. Water is not just a liquid mineral. It is the very blood of the earth. In his long, solitary vigils by mountain brooks, he saw that water, when left to its own devices, never moves in a straight line. It dances, it curves, it weaves, it creates intricate eddies and powerful vortexes. He watched with fascination as massive trout stood perfectly still in the most violent currents, barely flicking a fin, only to suddenly shoot upward against a waterfall as if pulled by an invisible vacuum. To the young forester, the explanation was not found in the muscle of the fish, but in the energy of the water itself. He realized that cold, dense water creates a centripetal force of suction, a spiraling movement that generates energy rather than consuming it. This was his fundamental realization, the difference between the force of explosion, which expands, heats, and destroys, and the force of implosion, which pulls inward, cools, and organizes. This discovery would become the bedrock of his life's work. In 1922, he put these radical theories to a practical test on a massive scale. Prince Adolf von Schaumburg-Lippe needed a way to move heavy timber from remote, high-altitude forests across treacherous terrain. The established experts said it was impossible without prohibitively expensive machinery. The forest master, however, built timber flumes that mimicked the winding path of a natural river, using hidden guide veins to create artificial vortexes within the water. He didn't just move the wood. He transported massive logs that were heavier than water itself, leaving the scientific community in a state of shock. They could not accept that a man without a degree had solved a fluid dynamics problem they deemed impossible. And this success marked the beginning of a lifelong war between the man who listened to nature and the men who only listened to textbooks. The core of the conflict between the self-taught inventor and the industrial establishment was centered on a single transformative word: implosion. He argued that humanity had taken a catastrophic wrong turn at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution by focusing exclusively on internal combustion and steam power, systems that rely on heat, pressure, and expansion. To him, explosion was the method of death. It was the process nature used to break down and decompose matter. Life, conversely, organizes itself through implosion, a spiral motion from the outside in, which results in cooling, condensation, and the generation of structured energy. He famously labeled modern technology a biotechnique of destruction. He envisioned a future where machines mimic the motion of galaxies and hurricanes, systems that would produce no pollution because they worked in harmony with the natural gradient of the environment. In his detailed technical writings, he described how water, when conducted through pipes with a specific spiral rifling, would become energetically charged, capable of purifying itself and even revitalizing the soil it touched. This wasn't just a quest for a new motor. It was a proposal for a total shift in human existence. He saw the forests as the lungs and thermal regulators of the planet, warned that mass deforestation would disrupt the hydrological cycle in ways that would lead to climate collapse and the death of fertile land. In 1930, he published a searing manifesto titled Our Senseless Toil, in which he declared that modern engineering was turning the earth into a wasteland. As his patents began to emerge, devices for water purification, suction turbines, and specialized copper plows, the doors of academia slammed shut. He was a man speaking a language that the coal and oil interests of the 1930s found terrifying. Imagine the threat posed by a power source that could be derived from the natural movement of air and water, requiring no combustible fuel. It was an economic nightmare for those in power. But as the world drifted toward the most devastating conflict in human history, his unique understanding of silent, massive propulsive force did not go unnoticed by those who sought total world domination through any means necessary. By 1941, the shadows over Europe had lengthened into a total eclipse of morality. The naturalist was no longer a mere eccentric living in the mountains. He was a person of interest for the SS. The most feared arm of the Third Reich, Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, was a man deeply invested in occultism and alternative sciences that could bypass traditional Jewish physics, as they called it. He saw in the Forest Master's theories a path to a propulsion system that could defy the British blockade and rule the skies. The pressure began with polite invitations, which soon turned into threats and finally into abduction. He was committed to a psychiatric hospital in Mauer-Oehling. This was a psychological meat grinder designed by the Reich to break the spirit of those whose genius was deemed too dangerous to be left unmonitored. He spent weeks in isolation, surrounded by the screams of those who had truly lost their minds, before being rescued by the SS for a specific purpose. He was transported to Mauthausen, a concentration camp synonymous with death by labor. But he was not there to break stones. He was taken to a specialized research subcamp where the regime had gathered a group of privileged prisoners, Jewish engineers, physicists, and master craftsmen who were spared the gas chambers only because their minds were useful to the war machine. Imagine the scene. A man of the forest who believed that all life was sacred and that technology should serve the earth, forced to act as the chief designer in a facility built upon the bones of thousands. The SS gave him a team of 30 specialists and an ultimatum that hung over the laboratory like a guillotine. Complete the research on the flying discs and the suction motors, or every man in the room would be sent to the crematoriums by morning. The air in that lab was not filled with the spirit of discovery, but with the cold, metallic taste of terror. The Forest Master was trapped in a living nightmare, forced to translate the secrets of the mountain streams into blueprints for a machine that was intended to rain fire upon the world. He looked into the eyes of his fellow prisoners, men who were shadows of their former selves, and knew that their lives depended on his ability to make the impossible manifest under the watchful eyes of the Black Sun. The research at Mauthausen centered on the repulsine, a device that functioned on the principle of the trout motor. The Forest Master worked day and night, his hands trembling as he sketched the undulating plates that would force air into a centripetal vortex. He was trying to replicate the bio-vacuum effect he had seen in the gills of a fish. The SS guards stood at the perimeter, their leather coats creaking in the silence, waiting for a miracle that would turn the tide of the war. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of the desperate focus of the condemned men working under him, the technology began to show terrifying results. Witnesses from that era, including former camp inmates and military technicians, described a machine that didn't just spin, but seemed to alter the very density of the air around it. When the first prototype was activated, it produced a high-pitched harmonic whine that resonated in the teeth of everyone present. It didn't just generate lift, it generated a field. In a secret test, conducted just as the Allied forces were crossing the Rhine, the repulsine reportedly began to glow with a strange, bioluminescent blue light, a phenomenon the inventor attributed to the vitalizing of the air molecules through extreme friction-free motion. The device suddenly surged with power, ripping its heavy steel bolts from the concrete floor and shooting toward the ceiling with such force that it shattered the laboratory roof. The SS officers were ecstatic, but for the inventor, it was a moment of profound horror. He had proven that the energy of the universe could be harnessed, but he had done it in a graveyard. He purposely began to complicate the blueprints, adding subtle technical errors that only he could fix, playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse with Himmler's inspectors to delay the mass production of the motor. He knew that if the Reich succeeded in stabilizing this power, the world would be plunged into 1,000 years of darkness, powered by the very force he believed should liberate humanity. As the Allied bombs began to fall on nearby Linz, the order came to dismantle everything. The prototypes were loaded onto trucks and disappeared into the Tyrolean mountains, and the prisoners who had helped him were liquidated to ensure the secret died with them. Only the Forest Master was kept alive, a lone witness to a technology that was about to be hunted by the two new superpowers emerging from the smoke of Berlin. The technology this Austrian visionary championed was never limited to flying discs or timber transport. It reached into the very soil that sustains human life. Following the war, in an Austria devastated by occupation and hunger, he turned his focus back to the earth. He realized that the introduction of heavy steel plows was fundamentally poisoning the fertility of the land. To the Forest Master, steel, a metal he categorized as hot and expansive, disturbed the delicate natural magnetic currents of the soil and dissipated the moisture required for micro-organic life. He proposed a radical alternative, the use of plows coated in copper or bronze alloys. He saw copper as a cool, feminine metal that maintained the soil's energetic integrity. In a series of controlled trials in Salzburg in 1948, fields tilled with his copper devices showed an astonishing yield increase of up to 40% compared to those tilled with steel. The plants were not only larger, but visibly more resistant to pests and disease without the need for chemical fertilizers. But once again, the iron wall of the establishment rose up. The chemical and steel industries, which were profiting billions from the post-war reconstruction and the sale of synthetic fertilizers, saw him as an existential threat. If farmers could regenerate their land simply by changing the metallurgy of their tools and understanding the flow of water, the massive agro-industrial monopolies would crumble. His patents were denied on absurd bureaucratic grounds. He was ridiculed in the mainstream press as a water wizard or a superstitious crank with no formal degree. Meanwhile, his theories on living versus dead water began to gain a silent following in the mountain villages. He explained that water forced through straight metal pipes under high pressure lost its electrical charge and its ability to nourish, becoming a carrier of decay rather than vitality. He designed spiral pipes that mimicked the flow of human arteries, keeping water fresh and oxygenated. He viewed the world as a singular system of communicating vessels where the health of the forest, the water, and the man were inseparable. Yet every step he took toward a practical solution for the world's problems was met with a pincer movement. On one side, the academic skeptics who demanded mathematical proofs for biological phenomena. On the other, the industrial giants who simply wanted him and his ideas of free energy and healthy soil to disappear forever. It is impossible to ignore the haunting connection between the forced isolation of the Austrian inventor and the events that defined the early Cold War and the global space race. While the world watched the rockets of Werner von Braun, which used the brute force of massive explosions to tear through the atmosphere, the work on implosion-based propulsion remained buried in classified files. He was not the only inventor of alternative energy to suffer this fate, but his case was unique because his discoveries were rooted in an observation of nature that anyone could verify if they knew where to look. He often compared his engine to a lung or a heart, organs that function through rhythms of pressure and suction, never through combustion. The official scientific world called him a mystic, but his mysticism was measured in horsepower and the measurable purity of the water he treated. By the mid-1950s, the man who had once dared to tell Hitler he was wrong was living in poverty, yet he remained tirelessly active. He was working on a device he called a home generator, a small-scale unit that could supposedly provide electricity for an entire household, using nothing more than a specific volume of water and air circulating in a self-sustaining vortex. It was during this moment of extreme financial and physical vulnerability that the final, fatal invitation arrived. A group of American interests, presenting themselves as a philanthropic consortium dedicated to the development of clean energy for all of humanity, approached him. Led by a man named Carl Gersheimer, they promised him unlimited resources, world-class laboratories, and the opportunity to finally see his life's work benefit the entire world. They insisted he travel to the United States, specifically to a private facility in Texas. The forest master, now 73 years old and feeling the weight of his years, saw this as his last chance to leave a legacy that wasn't just dust and paper. He traveled with his son Walter, hoping for a rebirth of his ideas in the land of the free. What he found, however, was a cold and calculated trap, designed to extract every drop of his knowledge before discarding him like a used tool by those who held the levers of global control. The Texas facility was not a lab. It was a psychological pressure cooker. For months, the forest master and his son Walter were kept in a state of golden imprisonment. They were provided with every luxury, but forbidden from leaving the grounds or making unsupervised phone calls. The Americans were obsessed with the ripple scene tests from Mauthausen. They didn't want his philosophy on water. They wanted the specific dimensions of the vortex chamber that could lift a heavy craft silently. Carl Gersheimer was not a scientist. He was a fixer for the American intelligence apparatus. He brought in teams of physicists who spoke to the inventor as if he were a primitive, demanding that he translate his intuitive understanding of the spiral of life into the dry language of vector calculus. But the forest master's knowledge was experiential. It was tied to the temperature of the alpine air and the specific gravity of mountain water. In the searing Texas heat, he felt his mind slipping. He was shown blueprints of American experimental aircraft and asked to fix the turbulence problems using his implosion principles. When he realized that his work was being used to refine the very mechanics of death he had spent his life fighting, this time for a different empire, he stopped talking. The Americans shifted tactics. They began to tell him that if he didn't cooperate, his son Walter would be held liable for technical espionage. They threatened him with a lifetime of litigation that would bankrupt his family for generations. The consortium revealed its true face. It was a front for a group of aerospace and energy conglomerates that had no intention of releasing a home generator to the public. They wanted to ensure that if his technology worked, it would be their exclusive classified property. And if it didn't work, it would be buried so deep that no one would ever find it. The Forest Master was broken. He was forced to sign a document that was a masterpiece of legal theft. It stated that all his research, past, present, and future, belonged to the Texas Group. He was even forced to sign a clause stating that he would never again discuss the suction vortex with anyone, not even his own students in Europe. He was stripped of his intellectual identity and cast out, sent back to Austria with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing knowledge that he had given the key to the very people who would keep the door locked forever. The journey back across the Atlantic was a nightmare of silence and bitter reflection. The inventor knew he had given away the key. He knew the world would continue to burn oil, to poison the great rivers, and to rely on engines that shrieked with the pain of friction and heat. While the secrets of natural harmony now sat in the vaults of corporations whose only function was to ensure that the global energy matrix remained unchanged. Em 25 de setembro de 1958, apenas 5 dias após tocar o solo austríaco, seu coração parou. A causa oficial foi exaustão e problemas cardíacos, mas para seu filho Walter, a verdadeira causa foi o desgosto profundo de ver sua obra ser sequestrada. His death marked the end of an era of intuitive discovery and the beginning of a systematic campaign of forgetting. But the most tragic consequence of his silencing isn't the lack of flying discs. It is the global water crisis we face today. He warned us that water is a living organism, and that when we treat it as a dead commodity, it becomes a carrier of death. We see this now in the massive droughts, the drying of the great aquifers, and the dead zones in our oceans. He predicted that by straightening our rivers and removing the natural forest cover, we would destroy the Earth's thermostat. We have done exactly what he told us not to do. We force water through straight pressurized pipes, stripping it of its oxygen and its natural magnetic charge. Then we wonder why we are plagued by chronic diseases and why our crops require more and more chemicals to survive. The water wizard saw a world where every home had its own source of vitalized water and clean energy, a world where the cycle of the forest remained unbroken. Instead, we live in a world where water is the new oil, fought over by corporations and sold back to us in plastic bottles, dead, stagnant, and devoid of the vortex of life. The silence imposed on him in the Texas desert was a crime against the very future of our species. We are now living in the desert he tried to prevent, thirsty for a truth that was signed away in a room full of suits nearly 70 years ago. As we look at the parched horizon of our modern world, the scars that the Forest Master predicted have become our reality. We see the collapse of the hydrological cycle, the acidification of the rain, and a humanity that has forgotten how to listen to the whisper of the mountain stream. Victor was not just an inventor. He was a bridge between the ancient wisdom of the earth and the technical potential of the future. He was a translator of a biological intelligence that has existed for billions of years, an intelligence that the architects of our industrial world have tried to erase because it cannot be metered, taxed, or monopolized. The story of the unseen key in his life is a final warning. When we allow the powerful to own the mechanics of life, we surrender our own survival. But the key was never truly lost. It was only hidden. His work remains a dormant seed, waiting for a generation that is desperate enough to look beyond the straight lines of modern engineering and rediscover the power of the spiral. The silence that was forced upon him in 1958 ends here with you. By remembering his name, by studying his observations, and by demanding a technology that serves life instead of destroying it, you are reclaiming the heritage that was stolen in that Texas laboratory. The unseen key exists to ensure that the voices of those who were interrupted are finally heard. Each share, each comment, and each person who refuses to accept the dead water of the mainstream narrative is a step toward the restoration of our world. We are not just recounting a tragedy, we are issuing a call to action. Re-examine the water you drink. Re-examine the energy you use. Re-examine the stories you are told. The water wizard died feeling he had failed, but his true work is only now beginning to resonate in the hearts of those who can feel the coming storm. The truth is, like the water he loved, you can try to dam it, you can try to pipe it, and you can try to poison it, but eventually it will find a way to burst through the concrete and return to the sea. Thank you for staying with us through this deep investigation into the life and death of a man who saw too much. Stay vigilant, question the invisible, and remember, the key to our future has always been hidden in plain sight, in the movement of the very water that flows through your veins. Until the next key.